high school seniors now. But they're playing.
Here's the final dagger to take Pitt. Florida State, the last 3 seasons, as a road favorite or a pick'em, they are 0-8 against the spread. Yeah, we're on Pitt tonight.
Canadiens and Bruins, original 6 rivalry. This, I believe, is as good a rivalry as there is in the National Hockey League, and it's one of the best in sports. It's been mostly Bruins lately in this rivalry. Canadiens coming in off a nice win over Colorado, where Carey Price played really well and got the shutout. Tuukka Rask has reestablished himself as the number 1 goaltender in Boston after some rocky early outings. He's won 5 in a row, and he stopped all but 8 of 154 shots that span. The Bruins, when they're getting good goaltending like this, are really tough to beat.
Yeah, Dave, you're going to lay a big price if you want to take Boston. You got a total of 5.5 in this one, and both goaltenders are playing well right now. As you said, Carey Price, he's coming off that shutout. That's his second shutout in the last 5 games. I'm actually going to look at the under in this one. Montreal's posted 7 straight unders, and Boston's 12-5 to the under following a division game this season. Let's go ahead and go under 5.5 goals.
It is always good to catch up with Matt Holt, Matt's one of the sharpest guys around when it comes to analyzing sports, risk management on the other side of the counter, obviously, and the UFC in particular. And we're definitely going to talk some UFC today because there's a guy, I got to find out what the goods on this guy are. Hi, Matt. How are you, buddy?
Dave, happy belated birthday. I know it was your birthday this past weekend. You don't look a day over 35, my friend.
35 times 2, anyway.
I thought you were in charge of integrity, and you're lying right through your teeth right now.
Listen, before we get into the football weekend, we got about a month to go before pitchers and catchers report to camp. How good has this offseason been for us, huh?
Oh, my goodness, unbelievable. I mean, on paper, I certainly think the Red Sox are still the team to beat, although I love the Paxton move for the Yankees, too, so that pitching staff certainly getting much better there. And as usual, the World Series very likely to go through the AL East.
I wouldn't be surprised. So let's talk about this weekend because it was really unusual. I can't recall a situation like this where the betting market got so wrapped up into this incredible hot streak that the underdogs have had in the playoffs. The house actually needed some favorites this weekend, and most notably, they needed the Patriots, and I don't know when the last time that occurred was.
Favorites went 4-0 straight up, 3-0 against the spread, and the books actually had a good weekend. Look, everybody got caught up with the 14-1 underdog run coming into the weekend, and I had never seen prices like this. I thought it was very reflective in the prices. I mean, we saw some games with over 85 to 90% of the money line bets on the underdog.
Wow.
So just simply amazing underdog run, especially on the money lines. And the books, for all 4 favorites winning, actually had one of their better weekends.
What surprised you in terms of the games themselves, or what went as expected?
The one surprise for me was, a lot of these games were high scoring and sub-weather. The one surprise to me that was in the Dome in New Orleans, that offense against that terrible Philly secondary took so long to get going, and that at the end of the day, even with some scoring late in the fourth quarter of that game, they only managed to score 34 points combined. I thought that one would be a little bit higher scoring. I thought that the Philadelphia receiving corps was as good as anybody's with Golden Tate and Zach Ertz and Nelson Aguilar and Alshon Jeffrey, but they didn't move the ball at all after the first quarter. And the New Orleans Saints and Drew Brees really struggled to find consistency in that offense, at least until the second half. That was probably the biggest surprise, was the lack of scoring in New Orleans.
Hey, Matt, I wanted to ask you a question. Off of the game, not concerning the games this week, but this past weekend, there was a major betting handicapping championship in New Jersey by DraftKings, and you've, obviously for your work before, how long does it normally take for something to be graded and hit an app when games are final?
So it depends, and I will say this, playoff games and national championship in college football, these type of events do take longer because there's so many more wagering markets available. You have props, you have first quarters, you have more in-game bets than on any other game during the season. And no one thought the Patriots game would go that as long as it did. I'm very familiar with that contest and how it went, and I didn't like the fact that they limited Sunday to just the two football games anyway, considering the rest of the weekend was wide open and people were betting NBA, hockey, and college basketball for the vast majority of their bets. And I thought that could have been an issue leading into Sunday as well, because I've been behind the counter for many, many years and can tell you that on these games that have drastically increased numbers of in-play wagers, first quarters, first half, player props, different props, that the actual wagering process is slow. Think about if you make a bet, you go and you make all your bets on the Super Bowl and you end up having whatever it is, 7 to 10 bets, and they vary from spread bets, prop bets, alternate spread bets, and you walk up to the window and right after the game, and some of them aren't ready to be cashed yet. And that's just normal in an environment like this. And when you add in, the 280 extra people in the contest all betting that game and everybody else, there's a lot of bets to be graded, and I'm not surprised that they had a little bit of a hiccup.
Let's talk about this weekend's action, because based on what we just saw, I don't know how to judge the market going. I'll make my own decisions on the games themselves. I don't care what the market does as far as that goes. But I am intrigued by what the analysts like yourself think the market will do this week with these two championship games and the two top seeds from each conference playing. We know the volume is going to be extraordinary, but where's the volume going to be on?
Interestingly enough, look at these two totals, and we've seen kind of a mismatch of action already in terms of where they're headed. New England, Kansas City opening up 59, already down to 57, while the Rams Saints open 55.5 all the way up to 57.5. So we've seen 2-point swings in both of these totals already, one going up 2 points, one going down 2 points, and I think it seems very obvious why this is happening. One of these games is going to be played in a dome in New Orleans, in one of the fastest fields in football. The other one in Kansas City, where we saw blizzard to start the game last weekend. I think weather early on is impacting these two totals.
Matt, going to the UFC, what do you got going this week? It's a big card in Brooklyn this week on Saturday night.
And it's an odd card because the main event is kind of not the main event from a fan standpoint. I think there's a guy on the card who everybody wants to see if he's legitimate, and we're going to start to find out now.
Absolutely, and that guy is Greg Hardy, former NFL star who ran afoul of the law and has now turned to the fight game as his revenue generator. 2-0 with 2 knockouts in the UFC is Greg Hardy, and they tried to find an opponent here, I think, to make Hardy look good. The interesting thing is going to be, where does Hardy go from here? Because we know the UFC, there's very few easy fights once you get into the UFC. So assuming he wins this fight impressively on a main card, this guy better have the skill set to compete with MMA's elite, because he's going to be in there with him very soon. I do think they tried to find a guy, or at least they did their very best, to find a guy who's going to be in there to get hit. So if nothing else, if that Greg Hardy power continues to be what we saw in his first two fights, he's going to have some opportunities to get that early knockout. The main event, really interesting here, champion versus champion, as TJ Dillashaw going down in weight to face Henry Cejudo. And I would be very careful about laying the 200 in this spot. If this fight was at 135 pounds, where TJ Dillashaw is the champion, I would overwhelmingly be on TJ Dillashaw right now at the minus 200 price. In fact, I would lay up to minus 240, 260, close to 300 on Dillashaw at his weight class. The problem here, and we've seen a lot of issues with fighters making weight and the deterioration of their skills and performances because of it. We saw her with Cyborg, who had so many weight-cutting issues for so long. Amanda Nunes goes in there and knocks her out. A much bigger woman Cyborg was than Nunes, and Nunes knocked her out in less than a minute, because those weight-cut issues can be so real, and the dehydration and the effect they have on the body. And in this case, TJ Dillashaw, never as an amateur, never as a professional, as he had to drop down all the way to 125 pounds. If you're thinking about betting this fight more than ever, I would watch the interviews. I would watch all of the weigh-ins leading up to this fight. How does TJ Dillashaw look making 125 pounds? Because if he doesn't look good, and I've heard he's had some trouble making the weight, then there could be a real opportunity to get Henry Cejudo at a big plus price.
Is this a spot with the fights, Matt, where you want to grab the dog earlier though because you get the people on
because
the day of the fight?
Because if they see the same thing on the way in,
you're going to lose the value.
Well, it's one of those situations where you have to have information in order to bet this fight again, because TJ Dillashaw is the better fighter. He is the deserved favorite if they were fighting at his weight class. Unfortunately, they're not. They're fighting at a weight class that he's never, ever fought at professionally or in the amateurs before, all the way down to 125 pounds. The weigh-in will be the real indicator. You could tell by a fighter's body, the real sharp MMA guys can, about how hard the weight cut was and how dehydrated he had to get. The problem is a lot of people are watching those weigh-ins, and don't be surprised if this line starts moving quick after those weigh-ins Friday morning.
Matt, you mentioned, going back to Greg Hardy for a moment, this isn't like boxing where a prospect will get, maybe a dozen fights against, we'll call them tomato cans. The UFC moves guys along rapidly, so you're speculating that this could be the last of the walkovers or showcase fights, if you will. I was following your Twitter account, Matthew Holt VP, and you brought up a name that's interesting as maybe the next possible opponent for Hardy, assuming he gets through Saturday night.
Yeah, and I think the UFC is as good as anybody at squeezing every ounce of juice that any fighter that has a name has. And in this case, former UFC champion Andrei Arlovski, whose chin, he tends to get knocked out if it gets windy in the arena. But he's a former UFC heavyweight champion, and he's a stand-up fighter, so his fights normally tend to end in knockout either way, which is fan-friendly. And he still has a name. At this point, I don't think he has any relevancy in the heavyweight division coming off a loss, and I think he's lost 7 of his last 9 fights now, Arlovski. But his name power is still good enough, and we've seen the UFC continue to use Arlovski on main cards, especially to put up younger prospects in the heavyweight division. That seems like the clear and obvious choice for Greg Hardy, should he win by knockout Saturday night.
Some interesting developments in the sports betting world, obviously, as things continue to expand. I saw something in the NHL, from the NHL this weekend, where they're looking to really open things up as far as live betting is concerned, props and things like that. They know it's good for business. Your new company, U.S. Integrity, is going to have a big role in this, because the more options there are, let's call it straight, the more possibilities there are for a company that's not aware of what's going on as far as fraud prevention and things like that to get victimized. So talk about U.S. Integrity a little bit, its position in the marketplace now and moving forward.
Yeah, game integrity and fraud prevention, and really conflict-free game integrity services is a must-have now for every professional and collegiate sports leagues. I've been fortunate enough to have started my own firm, U.S. Integrity, and we already signed 8 separate college conferences, 4 separate individual collegiate universities, 3 separate professional sports leagues, multiple sports teams. And again, the idea at the end of the day is information, data, analytics, and expertise, and monitoring putting all this information in front of people in a way that's easy for them to read, digest, and understand, with the analysis of what they should be looking at, what's going on, where the potential vulnerabilities are. A good instance of this is the NCAA hasn't put out any new awareness-based compliance programs for student athletes since the 2003 Don't Bet On It campaign. That didn't contemplate daily fantasy sports, betting on mobile phones, legal betting in multiple jurisdictions outside Nevada. So we're able to not only monitor the wagering markets for both our sports books and league clients, but we're also able to help with compliance issues such as the flow of information, insider information, which doesn't only deal with nefarious people, but HIPAA issues if you're releasing medical issues surrounding athletes, especially student athletes. There's so much that goes into game integrity and fraud prevention, and we're awful excited to be the leader in that service right now.
Yeah, I never had any doubts that it would work out for you when you moved on from, not from one side of the counter to the other, but to a different position behind the counter. And congratulations. It was a daring move on your part because you were in a comfortable position, but it's really working out, isn't it?
Absolutely has, and it's great to catch up with you guys. And look, this is an emerging industry right now. I mean, it's an absolute gold rush, and we sat back about 18 months ago and said, look, what's the best position to be in a gold rush? And that's selling picks and shovels, and the picks and shovels of the new